So good morning. Thanks for making it here. So my name is Ravi Arora, and clearly I'm not the person who's on your agenda to be the speaker. The speaker is supposed to be Jaya, who's sitting right here. Um, so she's kind of feeling under the weather, didn't sleep very well, so she's asked me to support. Uh, we're from JDS Eco Solutions. I am the business technical advisor to the company. Uh, as a in full disclosure, I'm actually the sales director for a organic food ingredients company called Global Organics. It's based out of Cambridge. I've been helping Jaya now for the last few years in her business. I'm fascinated by her bugs, like what I like to call it. Um, it's an area of a lot of interest for me as well, personal interest as well. Um, I did my undergrad in food technology from Minnesota, and it's an interesting now as I look back, food technology or food science really starts once the foods actually come inside a processing unit. So it's crazy to think about it, but a lot of food technologists and scientists that work in large companies are really disconnected from the agriculture side of things. And I worked in the conventional business for a long time, and then when I moved to global organics, it has brought this aspect of how foods are really tied to the ground, to the soils. Has made a big impact in the last 12 years that I've been with that company. And so when Jeshri kind of brought this idea up, it was definitely an area of interest for me to kind of jump in. So we will start, and I think it's very appropriate. Let me see how this works. Perfect. Okay. Um, we'll start talking about soil. It's a good place to start as you folks come for the winter conference here at NOFA. What better topic to start than talk about soil? Um, It's also the first time we're presenting at NOFA, so please bear with us. We haven't done this in the past. So um, and Jeshi's been kind enough to put these slides, so I'll try my best. so, uh, so we'll start with talking about soil and the issues causing its degradation, and then we'll jump right into how we feel microbes, and especially beneficial microbes, are essential in building soil. Um, we'll talk about the different types of microbes and how to manage them. That's the big thing: is how do you manage these microbes? You can't just put whatever labels say as far as this is a beneficial microbe. What exactly are you trying to do there? So there's going to be a little conversation about that. And finally, we talk about microbes in carbon sequestration. So we'll try to kind of cover a few topics. If you have any questions, please stop me in the middle. Um, or if you want, you can write those down and I'll try to answer as best as we can. This is a fascinating field for us. Ever since we got into this business, we figured we know a few things about it, but man, we've been learning every day that we go into this. As we talk to more farmers, as we talk to other users, we find new questions, new challenges that are posed to us. And so it's been a great learning experience. So I'm hoping that this conversation starts some of the same stuff here as well. So this is actually from a textbook from my son's undergraduate program at UMass Amherst. He's um he's doing his undergrad in soil science. Actually, he just finished in soil and plant sciences. And I love this picture that I'm going to his book. Um, You know, we always think of soil as just the ground in which we plant the soil, and in which we plant our bushes or plant our trees. But it's it's not just that structure. It has a lot of key roles. Big one being recycling of nutrients. We don't realize it, but that's a big role. That's where you've been reading a lot about how organic soils are a great sump for carbon sequestration. Um, so uh, the recycling system is a big one. It's also a habitat for soil organisms, and we'll talk about that more about with. It's an engineering medium. Our homes and stuff are built on soil. Bricks are made of soil. It creates the foundation for on which we create our civilization. So it's an engineering medium. It's also a system for water supply and purification. So lots of roles soils play. When describing soil, many often start to bring up the various aspects of soil to help understand its functions. Um, so soil fertility is often talked about, right? So soil fertility from our perspective is clearly the narrowest definition of of soil because it only refers to soil as in its role in crop production. Yes, it's important, but it's fairly narrow definition. Soil quality is slightly broader, but its scope only covers the ecosystem with reference to humans, right? So it's only talking about, you know, it includes soil effects on water quality, plant and animal health, and within entire ecosystems. But the section is talking about the function of agriculture. So it's still fairly narrow in its definition. Soil health actually starts to get closer to it. The USDA actually has a pretty good definition, and that soil health is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And I think that starts getting close to what we're talking about. And finally, the definition that we are using more and more nowadays is soil security. And I think this came up in the 2015 or so. And it encompasses the the definition of soil health encompasses human culture, capital, legal aspects of soil management in addition to soil health as well. So folks talk about various aspects. And so we start looking at what exactly is, give me a second here, how do you define soil? And I thought this one came the closest because it hits a few key aspects. It's a complex system. It's not just because it's underground, we don't see what's inside it. It's taken for granted. But understand, it's a complex system and it's at the intersection of atmosphere, lithosphere, the outer crust of the earth, hydrosphere, and biosphere. Biosphere is just the sphere in which all living organisms exist. All of us exist. It's that intersection that is critical to food production and the key to sustainability through its support of important societal and ecosystem services. And I had to read this out because it captures all those important parts. So what are those services? There's sustainable plant production. Obviously, you can't grow plants without soil. It's water quality, including retaining pollutants or others in the soil, buffering them, and biotically transforming them. I had to read these notes here for a second. Also, human health advancement, not just through crop production, but also the impact soil pollutants have in capturing heavy metals and what have you. So it has a direct impact on human health management. And finally, climate change mitigation. We'll talk more about that in in the in the organic matter in soil having its ability to sequester carbon. So what's the current status? What's going on? You've seen this more in this organization, associated with this organization, but numerous studies are showing soil erosion is occurring at alarming rates. You've seen this um, report that came out from UMass Amherst Research that found that the Midwest grasslands have lost close to almost 50 billion tons of soil in the last 160 years. Think about that. 50 billion tons of topsoil has just, we've lost that just purely based on degradation. Um, Main cause of soil degradation, other than industrialization, it's funny we talk about industrialization with soil, but most large cities, as we know it, not just here, but all over the world, have been set up in places that had the best soils. That's where civilizations flourished and they built cities and they built large. And so industrialization has often happened in places that has the best soils, unfortunately, um, and deforestation. But you can't let go of the agriculture part of it because 35% of global land is agriculture. 50% of the US is, over 50% is US, of land use in the US is agriculture. So, what happens to soil? you have to look at agriculture. You can't not look at this. It's a big part of it. Um, and what are the different forms of unsustainable agricultural practices? Intensive cultivation, where you're putting a lot of resources, both human and chemical and biological resources, into small acreages. Um, Unbalanced fertilization, pure quality of irrigation, um, you know, and finally the use of chemical inputs in soil. So it's just caused overall loss of soil nutrients, um, and we'll talk about the soil microbiome or the soil biome, microbial biomass. But it's been huge reductions in soil biological activity and also physical structure. Soil has a physical structure that's really important. And so you see a lot of that loss as well. So that's a good segue to talk about U.S. agriculture. So in the U.S., you've got 1.2 billion acres that are dedicated to agriculture. And I said it's over 50% of our land use that goes into that. In a year, we use over 20 million metric tons. Okay, so that's over over a billion pounds of chemical fertilizers in this country, 60% of which is nitrogen based and 40% is split equally between the phosphate and potassium fertilizers. Um, which comes at average of about anywhere 130, 150 pounds per acre per year. And why do you use this? It's primarily used because you're trying to replenish these nutrients in soil. And if that is not enough, we also add another 450,000 metric tons of pesticides into soil, uh, which includes the full family of herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, um, so these are more crop protection chemicals to enhance productivity. But there's a fair amount of chemical inputs that we put into our soils here to support agriculture. It's not good or bad. It is what it is. This is where we are right now. So there's a good and bad of fertilizers. I mean, clearly you can look at yields going back, and clearly fertilizers have helped boost crop protection or production. So there's no question that has helped a lot. But it came at an environmental cost. And as we continue to look at this, fertilizers do take a lot of energy to even produce. And we're finding out now that when you spread it on fields, it also produces more, you know, um, what do you call those? Nitrous oxide and other greenhouse gases. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Greenhouse gases that are produced by fertilizers. And for pesticides, so this is an interesting one that I found out a few years ago. Jeffrey and I have been talking about this, that if you go back in time and you look at pesticides and you look at, what percentage of agricultural crops were destroyed, go back about 100 years and you say, about 30% that were destroyed by pests. Where is it right now? We've put 450,000 metric tons of pesticides. What's that percentage look like? It's still around 30%. Now, I understand it's gone, so overall production has gone up. So in total tons, yes, it has made an impact, but I don't know. It's questionable. Its impact is questionable at best. And I think because organisms develop or pests and organisms develop pathogenic organisms develop resistance to these pesticides. And we're seeing this more and more. They're getting stronger and stronger as time goes on. So our perspective is conventional agriculture, especially if you consider the future climate scenario that we are facing right now, is unsustainable. And so therefore, some alternatives are absolutely needed. 95% of global food is grown on topsoil, and soil degradation results in the failure of that topsoil to hold water and recycle nutrients. And those are two most important functions of soil. Um, soil also contributes to biodiversity, as we talked about. Um, and so when you look at um, not just what's happening to topsoil that we're losing at the alarming rate, as well as agricultural practices and the use of chemical inputs. Um, we're also looking at, you look at organic matter in soils, the humic substances, and you look at, what's happening to that. That also has gone down significantly over the last several years. And so you look at that data and then you say, okay, what does it take to build this soil back? And you see that it takes over 100 years to produce 1 to 2 centimeters of soil surface layer. So from our perspective, we should really be considering soil as a non-renewable resource. And therefore, it's really important to start thinking about rebuilding soils. What practices do we take? There's several things that we can do. We coming from JDS, obviously, when Jayshree started this, this was really the part that was driving her was like, what there needs to be a better way of doing this. And so when she traveled to India and other parts of Asia, she'll see that there's a lot of use of biological inputs in soil. And a lot of it was done primarily because people couldn't afford fertilizers. So it's really organic by default and not by conscious thinking. But the fact was that she saw that people were doing things differently that were not being done here. And so this started this conversation as to, well, what's going on? How can we do these things different? And what we are finding more and more is, and over the last, it's been 5 years, 6 years, right? So over the last 6 years, we've been doing a lot of digging into this, and we're finding more scientific articles also talk about it, that microbes really are a way how you can regenerate soils. When you have good quality soil with high organic matter, a handful of that soil will give you about 7 billion cells, 7 to 8 billion cells. That's more than people on this planet. So you really look at the biodiversity of the microorganisms in soil. Um, and they're critical components. And as you start looking into all the functions that they can do, it's really difficult. Sometimes what people find most overwhelming with microbes in soil and dealing with microbes is that it's so overwhelming because what are microbes? They're essentially packets of enzymes. They consuming the sugars that the plant is producing that comes down to the root level, and it provides, it sustains those microbes that through its cellular activities essentially creates organic acids or enzymatic processes that then dissolve the nutrients that are already present and make it more bioavailable to the plant. So it's like this symbiotic process that goes on. And so it's that's what it is. So people find so overwhelming. It's like, what do I put in? It's not as simple as just a like a teaspoon of this microbe cells that I put in this soil is going to give me this yield increases. It doesn't work like that. You have to think broadly about this, and I think that's the part. But they're essential critical components, um, and they play a vital role in mitigating diseases for the plants as well as environmental stresses. And geez, I mean, there's so many papers that we can look that talk about this in the sense that not just the fact that they decompose organic matter, but then they also provide essential nutrients and recycle waste. And we feel that beneficial microorganisms together with organic matter they feed on has these two components have a potential to be a key part um, in revolutionizing human health. So what are the microbes in soil? I left out viruses in this, but I'm just going to talk about the beneficial, primarily the beneficial microbes in soil. Bacteria is by far the largest group of microbes in soil. Um, they are like the final stage breakdown of nutrients and releasing them in the root zone. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about, the rhizobacteria later. The actinomycetes, um, interesting. They used to be considered fungi until recently, but they have this ability of creating antibiotics. So they often are used as biopesticides or uh, biofungicides as well. So you start seeing some of the actinomycetes. fungi, fascinating group of microbes, and we'll talk more about this. But one of the things that, and I think overheard when I was having my coffee, somebody talk about mycorrhizae. Um, Mycorrhizal fungi is a game changer. In fact, I think there's talks that I've heard these fascinating talks for how mycorrhizae were the original communicating networks for plants and trees. Um, uh, so it's fascinating how trees and plants communicate using hyphal networks. And finally, protozoa. Um, and there's a huge benefits of protozoa in soils. That is, in the way they consume bacterial populations, they maintain them at an active growing phase, and it also enhances the rate in which bacteria decompose or dead organic matter. So very important protozoas. So this is the first, the lectures in biology that we take on protozoa and amoeba and stuff like that. It has a huge impact in soils. When talking about microbes in soil, a term that you'll often see is microbial biomass. And it's the microbiome, it's a mass of microbes and the diversity. Um, so when you say, okay, does all soil have the same amount of microbes? Is it pretty much homogeneous throughout the soil surfaces and what have you? It's usually not. Most microbial biomass is at the root zones, and the reason for that is they need to survive. Like all cellular organisms, they need survival. And so the reason why they're in the root zones is because they depend on the nutrients that through photosynthesis that plants exude out of the roots. And so they tend to stay in that zone because that's where they get their nutrients. Um, so the root zone is also referred to as the rhizosphere. Um, and because of their close proximity to plant roots, that's where they have the cellular functions and they make the nutrients, they take the nutrients from the roots. They do the enzymatic activities, they do the cellular activities, they produce organic acids, they produce enzymes. Those then dissolve the nutrients that are present in oil and they make it available in ionic form for the plants. One of the things with chemical inputs, when you put chemical inputs, a very small percentage of those chemical inputs actually get absorbed by the plants because plants have no way of converting that. They really depend on the microbes to make that conversion into the ionic form to make it bioavailable. So a lot of the a lot of the chemical inputs that is put in essentially doesn't get used and gets washed off as runoff. So there's a tremendous amount of waste in that. Whereas these, what they do is they make it available for us. They also play a very important role in pest management, and they have anti-pathogenic activities in just how they interact with the roots and plants. And in doing that, they also improve stress towards drought. There's talk about certain organisms forming biofilms around the roots, and they provide them support during periods of drought. We have, not with JDS, but in a separate thing that we do with cane sugar from Brazil. Uh, so it's called the Green Cane Project. You can take a look at that. It's a fascinating study on what these folks have been able to do with cane fields using biological inputs and how they've been able to make that cane much more drought resistant. Um, so that, and we're seeing the impacts. I mean, it's taken years for them to prove this concept, but it absolutely works. Um, and finally, the decomposition of organic matter leading to soil aggregation and also creating more nutrients for the plants. There are certain soil microbes that can also be harmful, but the key part in maintaining that balance is to have enough beneficial microbes. So it's essentially just a population game. What do you have in that rhizosphere to, to provide that competition against the pathogenic bacteria or pathogenic fungi? Right. Yeah. Okay. So as I said, a lot of folks do understand, like when we go and talk to potential customers that are trying our products out, they do get it that yes, microbes have the importance, but they, as I said, they get overwhelmed when you start talking about all the different enzymatic functions and all the um, uh, different processes that are happening in the ground. And so how do you put, and so we often run up having like, what impact will it really have on my yields? What impact will it really have on in my farms with regard to pest management? What impact will it have against drought? And so we end up doing these long-term trials and what have you. Um, and part of the issue is it's the diversity and complexity of the soil where we are putting our products in. So every farm is different. Every plot is different. It depends. If, it depends so much on the environmental factors. Has it been? Is that farmer going from conventional to organic? Is that farmer essentially using a fair amount of fertilizers up front and trying to cut back on the fertilizers? So a lot depends on what the goal is and what they're trying to do. So as you consider, different strategies, should really look at what exactly are we trying to do here in the thing. So are you trying to um, get the benefits from beneficial microbes to improve soil health and soil composition so you have, just generally a better crop, better yields, better plants, more healthier plants. Um, and so that's why I said predicting the overall response of soil microbial community in any of these practices is challenging. So people often have to do trials, but that's one way of doing it. We've been actually doing some work with hydroponics, especially in monocultures like cannabis, and they find a lot of issues with harmful microbes and fungi. And so we've been able to use certain products to control those. Um, there's also some crop management practices um, that if you combine that, like reduce the tilling, reduce the increase crop rotations and what, then microbes really come to help in those as well. So it depends what you're really trying to do there. So let's just go through the different categories. Biostimulants are the first category of products that you'll often hear. So I'm going to throw certain words out that you'll often see in labels and products that's out there in the marketplace. Um, So biostimulants, by the very nature, it stimulates something, right? So it stimulates growth. Uh, it can be applied to seeds, plants, rhizosphere. The whole idea is it helps to chew down. It either provides the nutrients like in humic acids or hydrolysates or plant extracts, or the actual microbes that essentially use those to stimulate growth, right? So that's your biostimulants. Or people will often talk about biofertilizers. And within fertilizers, you'll see different names, inoculants, microbial cultures, bacterial fertilizers. They're all different names, bioinoculants. These are all different terms that you start seeing on labels, but they're the same thing, essentially. But essentially, it's any substance, uh, essentially microorganisms, active organisms, then applied to seeds, plant surfaces, soil. They colonize the rhizosphere, the root zone, and they promote plant growth. Generally speaking, they're either bacterial or fungal. Two classes, bacterial biofertilizers. Oh boy, this does not show very well, but I can talk through this. Um, so we'll start here, the phytohormone production. So these are the different ways how bacterial biofertilizers work. So these are primarily phytostimulators that stimulate the growth of crops through production of phytohormones. So these are crucial for plant activities or metabolic activities, and they include substances like auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins. Those are here. So those are actual extracts from the microbes that essentially are there to promote growth. So you'll often see products like that. Interestingly, a lot of microbes, beneficial microbes, produce phytohormones. So you can either add the extracts directly or you can just use the microbes that actually produce that in soil. So there's that. Um, there's the next one, nitrogen fixation, which is self-evident. nitrogen fixing biofertilizers. They carry out biological nitrogen fixation. And so this is where you hear strains like rhizobium or azotobacter, right? So those are your nitrogen fixing bacteria that essentially take the nitrogen from air and provide it to the plant. There's siderophore production. Siderophores are um, these are special mechanisms or metabolites called siderophores that have the ability to sequester iron. Um, so iron, it's funny, right? So a lot of iron that is available in soils comes in the ferric salts. They have the ability, it's a complex set of processes by which they can convert that to ferrous ions and then make it much more bioavailable for the plants. Uh, Siderophores is also interesting because those are also metabolites that are given by a lot of um, the, the microbes that I actually use. So both siderophore production and human hormone production can actually come from actual microbes. You don't have to add those separately. And finally, there's nutrient solubilization. Um, so nutrient solubilization, as I've been saying, right? So what it's a it sounds really complex, but it's fairly simple. It's what happens in our cells. How do we give our bodies energy? You consume the food, cells inside convert that to energy. How do they convert that to energy? Through the formation of various activities that happens. The same thing happens in soil. They take the sugars that are being produced by the plant during photosynthesis. The sugars come down to the root exudates as root exudates. The microbes in the biosphere or in the rhizosphere essentially use that to perform their cellular functions, which then gives out acids, organic acids, or here, I'll show you. It's the next, I think it's the next slide. There you go. Here's an example. Phosphate solubilization process. Two types, right? Phosphates are available. There's inorganic phosphates, typically that is added in the form of chemical fertilizers, or there are organic phosphates that's available in the soil. If you add organisms like Bacillus megaterium, Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus amylomycopaciens, all these different organisms, they have the ability to create organic acids through cellular activities, which then will dissolve that inorganic phosphate and make it bioavailable for the plants. If it is organic phosphate present in soils, that is usually a enzymatic hydrolysis, also through cellular functions. But we just talked about breaking it down to ionic forms to make it bioavailable for the plants. That's what those bugs are doing. And it's the same thing whether it's potassium hydrolyzation or calcium or any minerals. That's the or potassium. That's the essential process that's happening. Now, you can look into scientific papers. They'll break it all down. They'll show all of the different cellular processes by which that is done. But essentially, that's in very layman terms, that's what's happening. So we talked about bacterial biofertilizers. There's a second range that is fungal biofertilizers. Mainly two types. The saprophytic fungi. This is, we don't talk about much about this, but it's without the saprophytic fungi. These are essentially digestive. They're known for their digestive activities. They're the ones that actually have the ability to break down organic matter. Had it not been for them, our forests would be just logs and leaves and buried in logs and leaves. So absolutely essential. Um, but for commercial purposes, what's most important is mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae, through their hyphal networks, have that ability to develop partnership or symbiosis with living plants. Um, and so one way to look at it is this. So this is a nice picture of mycorrhizae. These are the hyphal networks that you see from the root hairs. So bacteria are non-motile. Once you put them in the root zone, they are limited to that root zone. They don't kind of go around. And so when you add stuff like mycorrhizae, they make that ability, they essentially transform that entire soil surface because they boost the surface absorbing root area by almost 1,000 times, right? So now you can have nutrients throughout your soil mass, and the hyphal networks create the pipelines to transport those nutrients into the roots. And depending on the type of mycorrhizae, you can have endo or ecto. And it all depends on, endo takes it close to the roots. Ecto takes it close to the roots. Endo actually penetrates the root hairs and they kind of reside inside the roots. But either way, they're transporting nutrients into into the plants. So it's like the underground highways networks. Yes, root hair. That's the root hair, one of the root hairs. It's just a, that's the hyphae. That's the mycorrhizal hyphae. Yeah, I think those are more like organic matter and what have you. It's just a picture inside the soil. So they improve nutrient uptake by extending the hyphae into the soil. Um, they also form a physical barrier around the roots, and we've seen this in some of the tests that we've done, by which they actually work as a way to prevent pathogenic fungi purely by how they take over, they colonize the root hairs. So it's essentially just a competitive um, situation where they just take over that part, so they just don't give much room for the pathogens can attack. Um, and then they also enhance nutrient recycling and soil aggregation because again, it's the networks that are happening in the soil. When you consider both of them, so there's a lot of, so there's, you'll see products in the marketplace that are just bacterial biofertilizers. You'll see mycorrhizae, and then you'll see consortium products that essentially is a blend of these products. But both of them together, you consider them as a family of biofertilizers. These are all the benefits. And we've talked about, each one of them, plant growth and yield based on how they pick up nutrients. There's stress tolerance. There's environmental sustainability, obviously, because it reduces your reliance on chemical inputs. We talked about soil fertility and structures and how it makes that better. And biofertilizers have been found to improve resistance of plants to diseases through various means. We used to think that we could only use microbial biofertilizers in soil media, whether it's in pots, whether it's outside, whether it's in row crops or what have you. We've been surprised because we were challenged a few years ago by people coming to us and saying, hey, could you put this in hydroponics? We're like, well, it's getting flushed all the time. We're not sure how much the microbes will actually colonize the root surface. It surprised us. We're currently using products of, people are using our products right now in hydroponics for tomatoes, for cucumbers. They've used it in cannabis. And what we're finding, irrespective of whether you're in soil media or in hydroponics, you see the impact of beneficial microbes. They do colonize the root area. They do provide the support systems. They've been able to cut back on the fertilizers, on the chemical inputs that they put in there. They continue to put hydrogen peroxide. So that was the other thing is if hydrogen peroxide is used in hydroponic systems to cut out the pathogens, will it also affect uh, beneficial microbes? And they found it doesn't. It works really well with that. Composting solutions. So this is a new one, but it's a growing one. Um, so 3, 4 years ago, Jayashree approached UMass Amherst. We put our organism, and by the way, the main product of JDS is Bacillus megaterium. Um, and so it's a product called Aguafos. And we showed that to UMass Amherst. We put some trials with it. And one of the trials that we're looking at corn. We look at with control and then control with treated. And then there was another one where we actually added compost to it. And then we should put Aguafos along with the compost to see what it does. And it blew us away because we saw over 40% increases in um, root hair, root mass, as well as the vegetative growth, purely based on uh, addition of microbes into compost. So that led us to thinking that, compost is fairly rich in microbes, but there's still a lot of organic matter in compost that's still locked up, which with microbes, with beneficial microbes, can really make a big difference in the release of nutrients from compost. So we're currently now selling into this compost company out of Nevada or Utah, Nevada, I think. Yeah. Um, Going really well. They're seeing a lot of benefits with the addition of this in compost. So there's a whole lot of places where you can apply this. Biopesticides. So moving on, again, as the term suggests, it's pesticides. It's just biological. Um, they're biological control agents that are derived from living microorganisms. So what are biocontrol microorganisms? They are free-living fungi or bacteria or actinomycetes. And they provide a wide range of antibiotic substance, or sometimes they parasitize other fungi, or they compete, as I said, with other fungi. Um, those are the different ways in which how they act in plants. And so typical biopesticides that you see in the marketplace, you start seeing Bacillus subtilis. This is one that you often hear about as a very common pesticide that seems to work against botrytis. Another one that you see a lot of is trichoderma. That's a fungal. So you see a lot of microbial products inside that say trichoderma. But these are the typical biopesticides and what they work against. There are also some nematicides that are there as well. So some very interesting products out there now. And by the way, this is just a typical example. If you look at all the different organisms that can do this, it's a very wide, and new studies continue to come out on this whole time. Same thing, biofungicides. Um, and so they work primarily around pathogenic fungi. And so the way they work is through rhizosphere competence that we looked at, um, or parasitism, where they attack and consume other plant pathogens, or they produce antibiotics, or sometimes they induce certain changes in plants that increases the plant's own resistance to fight pathogens. And so there are all these different ways in which how some of these organisms can work. And typical biofungicides, which by the way, they're also within the broader family of pesticides. So you see some of the same names here. You see how I talked about succulus. Succulus is also used as a fungicide, but it's still in the general family of pesticides. Same here with trichoderma. It also acts as a fungicide. So you'll see some of the same names here. You'll see Amylomicrofaciens, that's another bacillus organism that is used a lot as a biofungicide. Um, Same thing with trichoderma, it's used as a biofungicide. So depending on certain organisms and what they're doing. Biofungicide use, so you can use them in growth media or as seed treatment. A lot of times we find using it as a seed treatment because a lot of them reside in the rhizosphere. So once you plant, it's very difficult to get these organisms. It's not like a foliar spray. They work as, somewhat as foliar sprays, but you really have to put them in the ground. And the best way to put them sometimes is as a seed treatment or just as a time when you're planting your saplings. Um, some growers also have success with dipping plants in biofungicide solutions, to some extent also in as a foliar spray as well. We found this in biofertilizers, especially that biofertilizers seem to work best when you put them with the seed or with the saplings or during transplant. That's when they have the most benefits. Um, yes, sir. What about injecting into the rhizosphere? Yeah, I think folks. Yep. Yeah. Sometimes they'll do that, or they'll put it in certain places solution that in your as the saplings are still fairly young, and then they go as a part of the spray or also in as an injection. So they work at you at that time. Okay, so now we move to carbon sequestration. What is sequestration? It's the process of capturing or storing atmospheric carbon dioxide, right? Why carbon dioxide? Because CO2 is a heat trapping gas, and heat trapping gases are directly linked to climate change. When you talk about CO2, there are two types people often talk about. One is man-made, that's all of us. Another one is biologic carbon dioxide that comes from decomposing organic matter, forest fires, other land uses, and what have you. So that's where CO2 is coming from. It's a greenhouse gas. People are looking for ways to capture it or sequester it or to take it from the atmosphere. What are two major ways of sequestration? And here's again, microbes will come in. One is the geologic carbon sequestration. And you hear about this where they actually convert this CO2 into liquid and then they inject it in the in the into the geologic basins. Or there's the biologic carbon sequestration. And that's when you say plant more trees. You know, trees will suck up CO2. And that's one. But what we are finding more and more is microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi play an important role in decomposing organic matter. And so that by itself is by far a very effective way to suck up carbon from the atmosphere. There was a study that was done, it was published by the Organic Trade Association a few years ago that showed the impact of organic soils in sequestering significantly more carbon than conventional soils. And so they're saying, one of the best ways to do this is do more organic farming, have more soils with organic matter that can actually act as a carbon sump. So that brings me to the end of my presentation or Jaya's presentation. So she was kind enough to put two poems here. One is in Earth's embrace of fertile dance, healthy soils, a life's advance. Roots entwine a vibrant thread, life's symphony in soil is bred. And the second one, obviously, we couldn't do this without microbes, without our bugs. So beneath the surface, a microscopic ballet. Microbes waltz in soil where they play, breaking down, building up, a silent shore. In their dance, healthy soils they restore. And with that, I thank you all, and I wish you well. Stay dry and enjoy the conference. I'll take questions this minute. Yes, sir. Yep. I'm just wondering how you determine what you're adding to the soil. Do you do testing, like in every and everything? Yes. So we do testing. We first figure out, what's the pH, what's the microbial load in the soils. Um, Oftentimes, farmers will tell us whether it is already, it's a conventional farm, that they're trying to start into this program, or if it's already organic. A lot of our products are OMRI certified, so a lot of our customers are organic farmers to begin with. Um, but even then, it depends. So we typically will do a test. Other times, the farmers will say, we don't really want to test. Can we just do a little trial? So they'll set aside of the plot, and then we'll do a trial there. Um, so it depends. But generally speaking, yeah, something of that sort. Yes. 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 It really varies and depends. So it depends what biostimulants. If you're using primarily extracts, like if you're using seaweed extract or if you're using humic substances of some sort and stuff like that, yes, they're providing you the nutrients in a direct form that plants can uptake. That, but biofertilizers are also biostimulants, which is why the definition is not. That's why I kind of put the microbes in within the biostimulants category as well. Um, Sometimes they work together. In fact, a lot of beneficial microbes that you see in commercial products actually use biostimulants as the carrier. They'll use, humic substances as the carrier. So it varies and depends. And crop of a high percent result in that mycorrhizal feed that crop, or does it still need to be biostimulated? It depends on the microbial load in the soil. But yes, like 90% or more. It varies. I think that it's so difficult to say this. But yes, I would say that be a good. The other thing that I'm seeing is a lot of mycorrhizal products that used to be just like the single cells, like Glomus infloraceae. That's a typical one that you see a lot of. Are now converting that into consortium products where it's a blend of mycorrhizal and beneficial bacteria together in the same mix. So even manufacturers are starting to look into this and say, you know what, I think this makes more sense. It only makes it better. All you're doing is when you add those microbes, the beneficial microbes in the rhizobium, and then you also include that with the hypha networks, it's it only makes it better. But a lot depends, I would say, on the microbial load that's in the soils. And at that point, you may decide, maybe just mycorrhiza is enough. It also depends on what kind of mycorrhiza. There's increasingly there's talks about, what exactly is in this, like spore count versus propagules. What is really effective in this mix. So there's just a lot of stuff that's out there nowadays. So you sometimes you just have to put it in your product and try it out in your soil or in a little plot and try it out. We had, like, when we approached this compost company, they were using this mycorrhizal product that had a lot of propagules, and they're like, yeah, it works a little bit. And then when we put ours, it was because it depends also on the count of the spore count that you have in the product. And it's all about the cost and use. How much do you really have to put in per acre? Because if it's got 10 to the 6 or 10 to the 9 cells per CFU per gram, you may only use like 0.5 grams or something per use, but versus you putting like a pound of the other one. It really varies and depends. You'll have to look at that. Yes. Yes. Thank you. How often would you need to treat with biofertilizers? Then what should you do to maintain it season? Ah, boy, we've been right. Yeah, a lot of times people will ask us this question that, most of the bacillus, for example, comes in spore forms. So they are, and they say, well, I'm putting this in soil. It activates in the presence of nutrients and in presence of moisture. The spores break down. The live cells are out. So now everything is working fine. So I don't need to add this again. And you do have a general decomposition over a period of time. So depending, some people will use it. You only need to use it like once or twice at the beginning of harvest. That's typically when you're only using most of these biofertilizers. As she said, a couple of times initially or 3 times. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I've heard that it's also a big part of regenerative organic as well. Um, I don't know enough about it to tell you the truth. That yeah, I mean, before you had commercially available organisms, that's really what a lot of the inputs used to be. Um, Again, it varies and depends, but if you're finding success with that, then by all means, I'd continue with that. But as I think as farms start getting larger and more commercial operations, then what we're finding. So I'll tell you where, very honestly, where Jay has been finding the most benefit with her organisms is primarily conventional farms that are trying to reduce their chemical loads, and then they are trying to, balance that a little bit with that. So it seems to work best in those areas, or it works really well with operations that are using compost and they're adding that to as an benefit, like an added benefit on the compost. We haven't really come across specific customers that are truly doing regenerative organic in small farms. So I couldn't quite answer that question very well. Yes. With samples and send it to the extension labs or no. Um, I mean, you can put it under the microscope and try to get some counts, but you need to get some proper counts. Like, what exactly is the microbial biomass each like how is it being measured? And then you'd also want to know what exactly do you have? Like, is it primarily bacillus? Do you have a lot of pathogenic stuff? Do you have, you know, you just need to know what you have. Most extension labs, but what we've been finding, yeah, that you actually may have to send it to a food lab. We've been sending it also to some food labs. Yeah. Some we found like University of Connecticut actually has a better extension lab, so we've sent it there sometimes. Yeah. Um, but yeah, most companies will usually find like a local lab around them that can do that you can send and do the biological assays. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Compost teas are very rich in microbes. Yes. It's just that how do you map? So as I said, a lot depends on what you're trying to do there. Um, when you bring in a robust culture of a biofertilizer, you know exactly what you're getting in there, right? So like, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to solubilize phosphate. I'm trying to solubilize potassium. I'm trying to solubilize some other minerals that are out there. It's very targeted. This is what I'm trying to do. I have this pest issue. I have this fungal problem. Okay, then I'm going to bring in, Bacillus subtilis or Trichoderma, and I'm going to attack this. So it becomes much more targeted. But yes, compost teas absolutely are very rich in microbes. Yes, and we've seen this. We work with that other company in Nevada that you've said that they do compost teas as well. But then they find that adding this to the compost s- helps irrespective of that as well. So yes. I don't. I know it helps. I just don't see. Again, it depends what you're trying to target. Again, we come from a commercial perspective that is, you know, we're trying to develop products that are very targeted to a certain use. Um, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, yes, they absolutely help. We just don't know what's the microbial biota like in those, and how do you get consistency on what you're trying to do. If that helps. I'm sorry if I couldn't be more helpful, but yes. Yes. personally well and hydrogen. So we find a microbacillus military. That is the one that we do. It's a Pelvinus bacillus subtilis of sorts. Um, it doesn't have the same level of um, antifungal or it's not specifically as a biofungicide or biopesticide, but it has a lot of the phosphate solubilization, potassium solubilization. It does fantastically. I think it also has something in a hydroponics um, system. Once the release of the chemical fertilization is putting in that. Right? So what is actually eating that and does this microbiome work with that system that you have to produce what you're doing with the then you able to cut back on the fluctuations and with the addition of of
So, mitigating events, the bacteria. So when you add that, and the uh, I mean the hydrocarbon systems with the hydrogen peroxide, the extra carbon monoxide is really, at
organism.
the organism's side. So that's what I have seen to that. What what is the source of your microbes? Like you find them in
PBS does not have any facilities where we grow, but what we do is we source uh, ingredients, so to say, from different places. Um, we visit those facilities, and these are pure cultures. So what they'll do is they'll start with a pure strain of a certain bacillus or a spore mycorrhizal, and then they grow it on plates, and then they get transferred to shaker flasks, and the shaker flasks go into pure cultures, and then in these fermented, just no different than yeast. You know how you do active yeast, like dry yeast that you find in markets. It's the systems for growing all cultures. Like when you have probiotic cultures, it's the same process. It's you start with a pure strain to a pure culture, and then you just kind of grow it in these fermenters, and then you harvest it at the end, and then you add some sort of a whether it's dextrose or clay or cubic substances or what have you as a carrier, and then you pack it up. It works really well with certain organisms that go to spores because spores give you a long shelf life. So you can keep it in a dry format and then you add it to water, it dissolves, you give it some nutrients, and then you can spray it to whatever. So it's very easy to use. So a product from us will just look like fine powder, and it provides what is it, 10 to the 9,
yes.
10 to the 9. So 5 billion,
My
5 billion cells per gram. So the cost of use is the use rate is very unique because it's very concentrated. Does that help? Okay. Yes.
she's still at that now.
Yeah. So it so what we found in our discussions with this company, and I can only talk about our experience, um, is first it was very new to us. We never thought that we would ever go to a compost company because we figured this is the ideal solutions. What blew us up was the testing that we did at UMass. Um, what we found is a general purpose biofertilizer that is not specific to like a specific pest management or it's not a biopesticide, but a general purpose that tends to break down the cellulosic matter in compost and or has the ability to break down the nutrients to provide solubilization of certain um, nutrients in soil is probably the best. Our product seems to be working fine. I'm sure there are other products in the market that may work too. I think you just have to just find a normal general purpose biofertilizer. But it needs to be active. It needs to be a micro. it doesn't make any sense to add fulvic acids or other stuff or seaweed extracts or what have you into compost because your compost is already providing a lot of that benefit. Um, you just need something to further break down what's already there to make it more bioavailable.
Using meditation, and that the screen that we have is very robust, and that's why I think we see the decomposition of compost at a faster rate that it is.
Cool. Well, listen, thank you so much. You've been very kind. This is not my presentation, but thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.